How do political motivations differ in war than in genocide? And are there any moral differences?
Well, my hot take is that all modern total wars have an inherent genocidal logic to them. Because modern total wars are not just about, defeating enemy armies on the battlefield, but also the destruction of, infrastructure, transportation, industry, attacks on civilian populations, etc. So I think there's something in modern warfare that is kind of inherently genocidal. So I don't think there's a clear dividing line between total war and genocide, although, obviously as a legal term, intent matters. But the genocide, the definition of genocide is very open. Destruction of a group in whole or in part. Well, when you bomb a civilian population with the intention of killing large numbers of them in order to force them to surrender, is that destroying a people in part? That seems like an intention to do genocide. So I think the nature of total war in the modern era, this full mobilization of society, uh, it has this entire just genocidal logic. I don't think it's an accident that it's the First and the Second World War which provide Lemkin with the kind of uh, uh, inspiration, as it were, to develop this concept of genocide. So I think the line between a vicious war and a genocide is a difficult one to draw, and ultimately is a political one to draw. Right? What gets accepted as a genocide and what gets not accepted as a genocide tends to be what do people in power in the global system
And
want to view as a genocide, and what do they not want to view as a genocide.
Here's
and
a question. I'm
it's
sorry. Go ahead, Kuba. Go ahead.
and it's pretty simple to game that logic, right? If you're worried that you might need to do a light genocide in order to win over your adversaries in a given conflict, just don't say the word, right? It's almost like mafia style rules. Don't admit to crimes on in any formal public statements. Don't write anything down, right? Officially, it's just a war, right? And what's one of the things that's shocking about Israel's behavior is how it less and less bothers to maintain the pretense that its goal isn't to kill massive amounts of Gazan civilians. That is actually part of the thing that's shocking and somewhat unprecedented about this conflict.
Pascal?
No, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that have always shocked me about one of the things I found out about Israel that really was what their policies was the sterilization campaigns against uh, Afro Ethiopian Jews, and I was like, hold on, these people
Yeah.
actually sterilize Afro Ethiopian Jews? Well, they do that to Afro Ethiopian Jews. What do they do to Palestinians?
It's insane, right?
Yeah.
Here's a question I have for you guys. Kind of a follow up here on the idea of what are the political motivations. Israel claims that there's a terrorist group called Hamas that is threatening their right to exist. Does that threat then constitute this as a war?
Well, that's how genocides begin. I mean, the Armenian genocide, what triggered the Armenian genocide? Obviously, tensions between Armenians and the Ottoman government had been growing for time. But when the First World War broke out, a small number of Armenian revolutionaries joined the Russian military, and as part of their campaign in Eastern Anatolia. And what happened during this moment, and there's an interesting parallel with the Israelis here. What happened was, at the beginning of the First World War, the military doctrine, at least when fighting Russia, was to try and rapidly advance, surround them, and then with a smaller military, you'd be able to cause the poorly disciplined Russian army to panic retreat. The Germans had executed this, very successfully in Russian-controlled Poland at the beginning of the war, and the Ottoman Generalissimo Enver Pasha, buoyed by the fact that there was unseasonably good weather in the autumn of 1914, launched an offensive from eastern Anatolia into the Russian-controlled Caucasus, a region where there's a large Armenian population, some living in the Russian Empire, some living in the Ottoman Empire. Now, some Armenian revolutionaries, there were Armenians, I should note, in the Ottoman military at the time, but some Armenian revolutionaries had taken this opportunity and joined the Russians. And when the weather changed very quickly, the Ottomans weren't prepared for it. And the Battle of Sarikamish, the Russians really inflicted defeat on the Ottoman army, humiliate the generalissimo, and there's a desire to find a scapegoat. Well, who do they find the scapegoat of? Well, they blame the Armenians. This number of Armenians that had joined the Russian, and they accuse the Armenians of doing, like trying to murder the Muslim population. You have uprisings taking place, and so you have this like descent alongside the kind of war of fronts. You have this descent into intercommunal violence. And so the state, partly because of his own military failures, strongly scapegoats the Armenian community. And I think we see a similar dynamic with Israel. Part of the story of October the 7th was complete Israeli mismanagement of the border with Gaza from a military perspective, because Bibi Netanyahu had redeployed Israeli soldiers from the Gaza border to the West Bank to assist in the ongoing expropriation of Palestinian lands in the West Bank. So when October the 7th happens, it's not just the matter of Hamas that's like the easy target, but the entire Palestinian population comes to be associated with the terrorist organization, quote unquote terrorist organization, just as the same way as the entire Armenian population comes to be associated with the various, what the Ottoman government regarded as Armenian terrorist organizations. So we have a kind of confluence of factors that come together to create, or at least create the perception of an existential crisis. And the only resolution for that existential crisis is the deploying of genocidal levels of violence, either to entirely wipe out a population or rather thin out the population to manageable levels.